past.
Well, that's right, Bernie. Of the people standing on the street right now, we would assume that very few knew John F. Kennedy Jr. very well. However, the man standing next to us right now did know JFK Jr. very well. This is Richard Muller. He was a fraternity brother of John F. Kennedy Jr. at Brown University. They were in the Phi Kappa Psi fraternity. First of all, can you show us the picture you have there?
Like anytime you hear news about someone you know, you dig out the mementos and...
First of all, where's you in the picture?
Well, that's me back then. We were both, I guess, 19 years old then, almost 20 years ago, and that's John down there.
What kind of guy was John in his fraternity days?
He was great. Again, it sounds like the cliche you're hearing for the last few days, but he really was he was a good person, good friend, honest person, good fraternity brother, no airs of superiority, didn't take advantage of his position in life.
What are you standing out here for right now? Is this your neighborhood?
It is. By coincidence, I live about a block away. I left my office today. I had my partner's cover.
You're a doctor?
I am. I'm a cardiologist. It's people talk about closure.
Gary Tuchman? Gary, we have to interrupt you because, Father Gallen, it appears that the celebrants are coming out of the church.
Yes, they are. And you saw that one of the ministers there, one of the servers, was carrying the Easter candle. The candle which stands as the symbol of light in the midst of darkness, the light that overcomes the darkness, of life in the midst of death, life that overcomes death. That Easter candle is always placed during a funeral mass at the coffin of the deceased, and is carried in procession today as an echo of that practice in the Catholic liturgy.
Father Gallen, as people emerge from this church,
yes,
clearly one presumes they will be in the deepest of reflection. Senator Edward Kennedy coming out now, and his wife, Victoria.
Look at him.
Father Gallen,
slapping Charles O'Byrne on the back. They love him. Go ahead.
How is one supposed to feel, having been inside this church, having heard the liturgy, having heard the eulogies, and leaving now?
Well, I think it brings together the pieces we've been discussing. The big word for this liturgy is realism. It embraces the bewildering reality of death, but it embraces more than that. It embraces the experience of life. And so that recognition of life that endures is what sparks people's hope. And so they come from that church experience, I believe, filled with hope. That is to say, the expectation that life endures, that life wins out over the experience of death. You see that on their faces when they come. They're profoundly reflective, but there's even some smiling, of course.
We see a number of the Kennedy cousins, William Kennedy Smith, Chris Lawford. We see Max Kennedy, one of us there on the left with the gray hair, one of the sons of Robert Kennedy, and others. We have been told that family members will be walking up 89th Street to Madison Avenue, walking north on Madison Avenue to 91st Street. CNN's Christiane Amanpour, who was a friend of John Kennedy's. They knew one another in college. Family members will be walking to the Sacred Heart School, which Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg attended. There will be a reception there, we're told. And presumably that is where at least some of the people we see leaving St. Thomas More Church are now making their way. Only 350 people or so were invited to this Mass to celebrate the lives of John Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Kennedy. There, Lee Radziwill, the aunt of John Kennedy, the sister of Jacqueline Kennedy. Coming out the door, Rory Kennedy, who was to have been married last Saturday. There she is, behind Eunice Shriver. Her aunt, there's Rory on the left, Rory Kennedy. Sarge Shriver, who also was at the public mass celebrated in Manhattan last night.
You know, Bernie and Judy, this idea of a short walk is quite familiar. The idea of a procession, a way of saying goodbye. All of us remember the scene at John Kennedy's funeral of Lyndon Johnson, Robert Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, Charles de Gaulle on that walk. When Robert Kennedy was laid to rest in Washington, there was a caravan of cars and even a press bus that took him past, as we see Arnold Schwarzenegger, Maria Shriver, his wife and a Kennedy-in-law. But this idea of one farewell trip is very much a part of other, unfortunately, too many memories of other memorials and funerals that we've all lived through.
From the Robert Kennedy train.
The train, and then they took a caravan past the Department of Justice, past the Poor People's March that was then going on in Washington in 1968 until they went to Arlington.
There's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. there, bending over.
That's right, Patrick Kennedy standing just next to him. Patrick being one of the three who were on the Coast Guard vessel when the remains of John Kennedy and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy and Lauren Bessette were brought to the surface of the sea. Ted Kennedy Jr. just there with the curly brown hair. We saw Senator Edward Kennedy, his father and the father of Patrick Kennedy, come out practically the first to emerge from this church.
There's Bill Vanden Heuvel, the white-haired gentleman who has been associated with the Kennedy family as a campaign aide for, I guess, almost 40 years now. Almost unimaginable, but that's what it is. Worked in the UN for a while.
Jeff, you as a speechwriter for Bobby Kennedy in his Senate days recognized some of these
Andrew
faces.
Cuomo, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, I think is right there. Well, the whole thing, the Kennedy family, when you think about it, people who have worked with them, some who've worked with many different generations of Kennedys, and so you actually see, apart from everything else, a kind of political history of the Democratic Party emerging from this church. You know, one campaign, another campaign, current and future campaigns. There's Senator Chris Dodd.
Senator Chris Dodd,
coming out right now. There's Senator John Kerry, the tall fellow with the salt and pepper hair, who shares the initials of John F. Kennedy.
Father Gallen, I'm wondering, we saw Senator Edward Kennedy give Father Charles O'Byrne a big slap, warm slap on the back. Does a priest feel good after, if one can feel good, this after all was a celebratory mass, does a priest feel good when he gets that kind of accolade following this very moving occasion?
Well, you remember that I reacted also, responded, I mean, very positively to what Senator Kennedy was doing there in his greeting with Charles O'Byrne. Yes, a priest feels good about that. If people respond that way, it's something of a message to the priest that, well, you didn't mess it up too bad. You got, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, you are, you know, verging on 5.
You're the only one here who could say this.
Well, I'm glad to. It's hard work to do that stuff. And I mentioned earlier, before, the task of connecting the dots. That's an enormous challenge to do that. And to try to help people see how God, to help them get in touch with the experience of God in their lives, or if they're in touch with it, to help them name it and to see where it might be leading them. This job of being a priest is a big challenge, and anyone who thinks they've got it made needs to go back to priest school.
But I keep thinking, Father, about how difficult it is, thinking just, it was less than 3 years ago in September of 1996 when Father O'Byrne went to Cumberland Island off the coast of Georgia to preside at their wedding. And here he is, the summer of 1999, and they're both gone.
They're both gone, and it's been a terrible burden on Charles O'Byrne as well. As for the rest of the family, for sure. But Father O'Byrne was so close to them that I could tell it in the slump of his walk that it was a great load on his shoulders. He felt it deeply, and I think that he managed to meet the challenge this morning, judging from the reaction of those folks as they come out of Mass in their response to him.
Among those having heard Father O'Byrne, I just saw Rhode Island Senator Claiborne Pell, Diane Sawyer of ABC News, as they continue leaving. Just on chance, if you're just joining CNN's live coverage from New York City, wherever you are around the world, this is the exterior of St. Thomas More Church, where a celebratory Mass has just ended.
Gentlemen.
And slowly, people who were inside, the specially invited guests, are coming out very, very slowly. We have not seen the President, his wife, and daughter yet.
Bernie, we want to remind our audience, as I'm sure they know, but we should remind them we're speaking so much about the Kennedy family, about John Kennedy Jr. This was also a Mass for Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. There surely are friends and family of Carolyn Kennedy in this crowd, but because we don't know them, don't recognize them, we're not calling out their names as frequently as we are people who are familiar to us, either Kennedy family members or political figures. And I know that we are mindful of that. We know they are very much a part of this service. She was every bit as much a part of this service as was her husband, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy.
And also her sister, Lauren. There will be a service for her in Greenwich, Connecticut, Saturday.
For her sister, Lauren Bessette, that's
yes,
right.
At 7 p.m. on Saturday.
That's right. And many of the Kennedy family members, I've been told, are going to attend that. I know Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, among others, plans to be there among the representatives of the Kennedy family. The walk that we mentioned a moment ago, walk up 89th Street to Madison Avenue, then on to the school, the convent where Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg attended school. That walk is now getting underway, but we are still showing you the exterior of St. Thomas More Church. Senator Alan Simpson, Republican, retired from the United States Senate, has been head of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. John Kennedy was involved on the board of that school, and he and Alan Simpson got to know one another better as a result of that.
We've heard in the past of that, about how even in this day and age, friendships cross party lines. Simpson and Kennedy were political opposites, but friends, as was Utah Senator Orrin Hatch, a conservative who probably votes a different way from Ted Kennedy 90% of the time, but has great personal fondness for him, and vice versa. This is one of those things about politics that keeps it civil.
You can imagine, I think, from looking at this crowd of people, that these were literally hand-selected. These people were hand-selected by Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg, and to the greatest degree, and I think to a somewhat lesser degree by Senator Ted Kennedy. These are people who knew John and Carolyn.
Father Gallen and Ed Klein, I'm thinking back over whom we've seen leave this church. Now, we saw Teddy Kennedy leave very, very early on, once the celebratory Mass ended, and I have not seen Caroline come out. Could it be that she is inside the church saying goodbye to people as they go past?
That could very well be the case. I was watching carefully also, and I did not see her exit the church either. It may well be that she is visiting with people still in the body of the church, or she may have exited through the sacristy. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's another way out there. Through the sacristy is that small room that is on one side of the church where the vestments and other vessels are kept. The school at 91st Street and 5th Avenue, to which everyone is now moving, is both a convent of the Religious of the Sacred Heart, the sisters, and the school that they run. And it's really it's a beautiful building. It's the old Kahn Mansion there on the northeast corner of 91st and 5th. And it's a place where the best kind of education is given to their students. Surely it's in an elegant part of town. The sisters have never lost sight of their mission to help these young students grow in a holistic view of life. Those sisters are themselves so devoted to the social apostolate, not only the educational apostolate, but the social apostolate, including the poor of our city. I remember one time, I've prayed the Eucharist there in that convent chapel many, many times with those sisters. And I remember one time that the sisters invited Dorothy Day to be the homilist, that is to say, to, as I said earlier, connect the dots for the sisters and their students. And I'll tell you, I was a bit nervous before Mass began as I went to meet Dorothy Day and say, how do you do? Is what I'm going to do okay with you? Dorothy Day was a very modest person, but also a person of high intelligence and very clear focus. And when I approached her, respectfully asking her direction, she looked at me as though I was the one who should be giving her direction. And it was a wonderful encounter. But Dorothy Day, the foundress, if you'll remember, of the Catholic worker movement, now that's the kind of person that those sisters invite to that school to form their students.
You know, even as we talk, Father Gallen, about what a private, personal event this is, we do see some familiar faces from Washington here. We saw White House Chief of Staff John Podesta. We just saw Paul Begala, very prominent political advisor to President Clinton. We've seen, we mentioned Alan Simpson and his connection. We saw John Kenneth Galbraith, family friend, the renowned economist. But there have been Ken Duberstein, Republican, Chief of Staff toward the end of the Reagan administration. So it is a mixed political group, mostly Democrats, to the extent these are political people here. But there is a smattering of political faces and lives in this group.
Well, we should remember that you made the point, I think, that John Kennedy Jr.'s magazine cast a very wide net. He had invited former New York Senator Al D'Amato to write an advice column for George magazine, which the former senator still does. And he also, at one point, just now, the new issue of George magazine is the comedy issue. We were talking earlier about his attempt to fuse entertainment and politics, and I believe Ben Stiller, the young comedian and actor, is the guest editor. So this was a very wide net that John Kennedy Jr. cast.
Even as we do see the political figures here, Ed Klein, this is a far more intimate affair, is it not, than perhaps some of the large Kennedy events we've seen in the past?
Yes, Judy, I'm struck by the difference between this crowd and the crowd that attended Jackie's funeral 5 years ago. All funerals have a certain social quality to them, and whereas Jackie's funeral attracted fashion designers, celebrities, singers, publishing executives, some of the more famous celebrities of New York City, this funeral for John and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy seems to be a much, much more low-key affair with only a smattering of familiar faces, a much more intimate occasion, it seems to me, than Jackie's funeral.
Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, we know, had come out of the world of fashion. She had been a publicist for Calvin Klein, and I guess I was looking for Calvin Klein. We were told at one point that he was the one who had brought her to New York from Boston, where she had worked. She graduated from Boston University. I didn't see him. It doesn't mean he wasn't here, but it was, it seems to me, predominantly a Washington crowd. crowd of people connected more to the Kennedy side of this family. It does look as if the church is just about empty. We didn't, as Bernie said a moment ago, we haven't seen Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg, John Kennedy's sister, come out. It may well be that she left through a side entrance or left very early before we could see. Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken, this is still the president's limousine. The policeman is blocking my view. I can't tell whether the presidential flag and the American flag are on the forward fenders.
I believe you're right. That may well be the... And if that's the case, he may still be inside with Caroline.
Indeed. If he's here, if this is his motorcade, and he's inside this church with Mrs. Clinton, Chelsea, we have to infer
that they're spending time with the sister, Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg.
Yeah.
In fact, we've been told that the Clintons are not going to attend the reception a few blocks away at the Sacred Heart School and the convent of the Sisters of the Sacred Heart, that they are going to return to Washington, or at least leave the scene of the Mass and go on about their schedule.
And also, if they are inside, this would be the opportunity for the Clintons to present those 3 photo albums, although Senator Edward Kennedy has departed, that John King told us about. This would be the opportunity for the President, Mrs. Clinton, and Chelsea to pass on to the 3 recipients, the Bassett family, Caroline, and also Senator Teddy Kennedy, these 3 marvelous photo albums, some of which we saw a short time ago here on CNN.
As we consider this celebratory Mass, which just ended, we think about 20 minutes or so ago, we've spent much of the last 20 minutes looking at the individuals who were part of the service by invitation only. Chris Black is joining us nearby. Chris, what did you make of the people you saw leaving the church?
Well, Judy, I was told that the Bassett-Freeman family worked very, very closely with the Kennedy family on the guest list for this private Mass of Resurrection, a memorial Mass to John and Carolyn Kennedy. But it is very clear that the Kennedy side dominated. John Kennedy Jr. had 26 surviving first cousins, a number of aunts and uncles. Those cousins have 54 children of their own. A number of them were here today. The Bassett-Freeman family is planning a separate service tomorrow in Greenwich, Connecticut. That will be their opportunity, actually, to have more of their side of the family. So a number of them were here today. But clearly, this was dominated by the Kennedys. As Jeff Greenfield noted, you do get an extraordinary sense of the political legacy of this family. There are a number of people who were associated with President Kennedy's time in office, Ted Sorensen, who was his chief of staff, John Kenneth Galbraith, Robert McNamara. But it's also important to note that people were not invited to this massive celebration just because they were famous or because they had some Kennedy connection. They were invited because they had some connection with John Jr. and his wife Carolyn. So this was intended to be a very intimate affair. Senator Ted Kennedy was one of the first out of the church, and he also delivered the principal eulogy. A second eulogy was delivered by Hamilton South on behalf of the Bassett-Freeman family. Judy and Bernie?
Chris, the Bassett service, Bassett-Freeman family service you mentioned, that too, it's in Greenwich, Connecticut. That too, however, is a small church, we're told. Is that right?
That's exactly right. I was also told early in the week, Judy, by family friends, that the Bassett-Freeman family were quite intent from the beginning in having their own service, particularly to commemorate the memory of their daughter Lauren. Obviously, this has been dominated by John Jr., the fact that he was so famous. That's the point where as you noted, that we forget that this service was intended also to recognize his wife Carolyn. So the family of Carolyn and Lauren Bassett, from the beginning, have been quite intent that they would have a service that was focused exclusively on their girls, which will be tomorrow in Greenwich, Connecticut at 7 o'clock, a private affair at Christ Church, an Episcopal church there. Judy?
And as we mentioned, a number of the members of the Kennedy family are planning to attend that to represent. Jeff?
You know, we've been hearing a lot today appropriately about faith and consolation and what it means for families to be together, but I can't help remembering a line that a civil rights leader offered I've been to too many funerals, he said. And here's Ted Kennedy coming out with Carolyn Kennedy.
That's his wife, Victoria.
Victoria Kennedy.
It may have been his daughter, Kara, and his son, it looked like, Teddy Jr. coming out soon.
But I think what must be going through his mind is something along that line, that after the murder of yet another civil rights leader, a young man got up and said, you know, I've just been to too many funerals. And for all of the consolation of faith, you can't help but think that that is going through the minds of a lot of members of this family, and indeed an awful lot of Americans and people around the world. We've just seen this too many times.
I read a quote from someone who walked up, I guess, to the Kennedy family compound. I think this was in the newspaper, today's USA Today. And they said, yes, God doesn't give us any greater burden than we are able to bear, but how much more can one family handle? Father, what do you say when that question is posed?
How much more can this family bear? It's the question that confronts what we were describing earlier as the most baffling and enigmatic moment of the human journey, death. I think the thing that can inspire people is if we're successful in helping people to detect in their lives other instances where there has been, for example, in the midst of total darkness, some light has broken through. If a person can find that in their own journey, well, that's their experience, and nobody can take your experience away from you. If a person has been, for example, in the midst of what seems to be a prison of their own devising or of someone else's, and some kind of freedom has broken through in the midst of that apparent slavery, well, then you can conclude that there's a force stronger than the force of slavery, and a force stronger than the power of darkness, if that's been your experience.
We're now seeing President Clinton, Chelsea Clinton, First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton leaving St. Thomas More Church. They have lingered longer than almost all the other participants in this service that lasted about an hour and a half. They've stayed inside almost an additional half an hour.
Ed Klein, you had some thoughts on the point that Father Gallon was making?
I live around the corner from St. Thomas More Church, and yesterday I went there to view all these people putting flowers on the church railing, and I noticed there was a commemorative plaque there quoting St. Thomas More from his famous work Utopia. And the quote is, "You cannot abandon the ship in the storm because you cannot control the winds." I think this is a great quote and a wonderful quote for the Kennedys, who, despite all the storms, I'm sure will not abandon the ship.
We continue to look for a sign of Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg, John Kennedy's sister. It may well be that she is still inside this church. It may also be that she's chosen to go by some other route to the convent a few blocks away where the family is having a reception.
President Clinton's motorcade now moving slowly away from the church. Earlier this morning, he, his wife, his daughter flew aboard Air Force One and landed at JFK International Airport. And in Marine One, the helicopter brought the president and his party closer, and they are preparing to go back to Washington. It's very warm here in New York City. As you can see, there is a breeze. but it's very warm and sunny.
We see, again, our cameras are trained on this church on 89th Street. Most of the people, virtually everyone who was in this service, has left now to walk a few blocks away over to Fifth Avenue, to a convent where the family's having a reception. Arthur Schlesinger Jr. was one of the people in the service, and I saw in a piece that he wrote this week for Time magazine, he remembered Robert Kennedy's reaction when his brother John was struck down by an assassin, saying to a friend, "God, it's so awful. Everything was really beginning to run so well. Why, God?" And later, Robert Kennedy wrote on a yellow piece of paper, "The innocent suffer. How can that be possible and God be just?" And Arthur Schlesinger went on to say that Robert Kennedy found solace in Aeschylus, memorizing the lines from the Agamemnon that he would use later when Martin Luther King Jr. was killed.
Even in our sleep,
That's
pain
right.
we cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart until it is healed by the awful, I believe the phrase is the awful majesty of God. He said that to a crowd of folks in a ghetto in Indianapolis in April of 1968.
That's right.
Telling them the king had been killed.
And in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom to us by the awful grace of God. Now here, leaving the church, these may be members of the choir. We're told the O Freedom Choir was providing a large part of the music of this service. Wycliffe Jean, the hip-hop singer, former member of the Fugees, was a soloist here today. Still, with the limousines and others, you still get the sense they're waiting for someone to come out. And
Our thanks very much to Jeff Greenfield, our always capable analyst, Kennedy biographer Edward Klein, and the professor of liturgy who shared so many insights into Catholicism with us today, Father John Gallen.
this service has ended a little about half an hour ago. The people who participated have moved on to a place not too far from here, a convent, a school where there's a reception. We will be wrapping up our coverage, special coverage, of these services commemorating the lives, celebrating the lives of John Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy.
And also, we're going to try mightily to get the texts of the eulogies that were delivered inside this impressive church today, and we'll try very hard.
Thank you very much for joining us, to you, including our international audience.
And we leave you with these impressions.
My father is part of the mythology of this country, and he was also a very compelling political figure, and I think certainly he was aware himself of the opportunities for politics to be both fun and serious.
There has been a shooting. The President of the United States is dead.
Mrs. Kennedy took her two little children, Caroline and John Jr., to say a last farewell to their father.
I grew up most of my life in very ordinary circumstances. I went to school, I took the bus to school, I went to high school, I You know, I went to college. I played sports in college. I got a job when I went. Then I went to law school.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How you feeling?
Pretty good.
Pretty good?
And I worked for the DA's office, which is a down in the trenches kind of job. And so, you know, all the sort of theatrics really kind of played out beyond the confines of my life.
Good place to work. Great place.
My mother passed on. She was surrounded by her friends and her family and her books, and we all feel lucky for that. And now she's in God's hands. We which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Wherefore comfort one another with these words. Ladies and gentlemen, meet George.
Starting a magazine was a huge enterprise. We were 2 years in starting this.
And a couple issues on down the line, my last name isn't really going to matter.
My cousin John did tie the knot yesterday.
The FAA called the tower at the Martha's Vineyard Airport and inquired about the tail number of John F. Kennedy Jr.'s airplane.
We have found debris, we have found luggage. We were able to remove the wreckage and clear the victims.
Very much at the heart of the Catholic liturgy is the beautiful prayer for burial at sea.
And may the Kennedys and the Bissetts know that all of us are with them at this time in prayer.
I think that there's a sense of not worrying too much about things that you can't control. Just sort of living your life and doing what you feel and where your interests take you. It's complicated, and it makes for a rich and complicated life. But that's, I think, part of the puzzle to figure out in my life.
My dad always kept his word, always kept his promises. A very honorable man. And now, after his stroke, the promises that were made to him, those promises have been broken.
Medicare spending is billions less than the balanced budget promised. These cuts threaten the vital services nursing home patients need.
My dad, his generation, did everything for us. And this is their reward. This is the big payoff.
Call Congress. Call the White House. Restore Medicare funding for nursing homes.
So I asked my old bank to call me if a better mortgage rate came along. It was 16 years ago. But at wingspanbank.com, they're always out there comparing mortgage rates from all kinds of different places. You tell them what you got, they tell you when you can do better. I mean, you can wait for your old bank to call, but...
If your bank could start over, this is what it would be. wingspanbank.com.
I work out to keep my body in shape. To help keep my mind sharp, I take Quantera Ginkgo biloba. It helps me concentrate, maintain focus. Why Quantera? All ginkgos aren't the same. The patented Quantera extract was proven safe and effective by doctors in extensive clinical trials. And it increases oxygen supply to the brain. With Quantera mental sharpness, I feel my best, naturally. If it's not clinically proven, it's not Quantera.
We don't keep ourselves at a safe distance.
We don't have blind faith.
We read.
We listen.
We learn.
We plan to retire rich.
$7.95 stock trades, low margin interest rates, comprehensive research. ShoreTrade.com, a smart tool for smart investors.
Tonight on Larry King Live, on the night of his memorial service, we'll remember John F. Kennedy Jr. Join friend John Barlow, Martin Luther King III, and more tonight, 9 Eastern on CNN.
Sunday on CNN Perspectives.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
His orbit around the Earth launched a new era in space exploration. Then his return to space captured the hearts of millions.
John Glenn is an American hero.
Now an intimate and revealing look at the life and times of one of America's most celebrated astronauts.
To look out at this kind of creation and not believe in God is to me impossible.
The John Glenn Story, Return of the Hero. CNN Perspective. Sunday, 9 Eastern on CNN.
To you from CNN Center in Atlanta, this is CNN Today. I'm Natalie Allen.
And I'm Lou Waters. One day after his ashes were scattered at sea, John F. Kennedy Jr. was mourned today in New York.
A private mass in Manhattan for John Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy ended a short time ago. About 350 people attended the service at the church at St. Thomas More. They included family members, close friends, and President Clinton and his family. Mr. Clinton brought along 3 albums of White House photos taken when John and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy toured the White House last year. A senior official says the albums will be given to the family of Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, to Carolyn Kennedy Schlossberg, and to Senator Edward Kennedy. Senator Kennedy delivered the eulogy at today's Mass, which was closed to reporters. CNN's Chris Black is outside the church. Chris.
Darren, the crowd here at the Upper East Side is beginning to thin out. A Mass of the Resurrection, a Mass to celebrate the lives of John and Carolyn Kennedy, ended about a half hour ago. Senator Edward Kennedy led the family out of the church. He was among one of the first to leave the church. Very symbolic, given that Senator Kennedy has been central in leading the family through this extraordinary week of mourning. Just a week ago, John and Carolyn and his sister-in-law Lauren were heading to Hyannisport, Martha's Vineyard first, then Hyannisport, for a family wedding. Their plane went down off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, and the family has been in grief ever since. A number of Kennedy relatives were here today. John Kennedy Jr. has 26 surviving first cousins, and a number of them were here. His aunts Eunice and Pat and Ethel were here. His aunt Lee Radziwill from his mother's side. There were a number also of representatives from the Bessette-Freeman families. Family sources say that the 2 families worked this out very carefully between the 2 of them, though tomorrow the Bessette-Freeman family will have a separate memorial service for their daughters Lauren and Carolyn. But clearly this was very much a Kennedy-dominated event. President Clinton, his wife Hillary Rodham Clinton, his daughter Chelsea were probably the most prominent of the mourners, but they were not only here because of their position in American life and representatives of the American people. President Clinton and Hillary and Chelsea had a social relationship with John and Carolyn Kennedy. I'm told by sources that Chelsea Clinton was particularly affected by the death of John Jr., whom she said had been extraordinarily kind to her in trying to help her cope with the difficulty of being the child of a president. There was a great debate within the family as to whether to have a large, more public proceeding, but in the end, Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg, John's older sister, his closest surviving relative, won out. This Mass of the Resurrection was held at St. Thomas More Church, the church which Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis worshipped when she was still alive. Now, my colleague Gary Tuckman joins us with more.
Well, Chris, we've seen a common emotional thread all this week, whether it was on the streets near the Memorial Mass today, or the streets near a public Memorial Mass last night, or outside of John F. Kennedy Jr.'s apartment in the Tribeca section of Manhattan. Thousands of people have come out. They may not have known the Kennedys, they may have never seen a Kennedy in person, but they wanted to be part of this to show their respects. For example, at John F. Kennedy's apartment in Tribeca, over the last 7 days, thousands of people have turned out to leave flowers, to leave notes, to leave candles. You can't even count the flowers anymore because there are flowers upon flowers upon flowers, and people have waited for over an hour in line down the block just to show their respects. Last night at a public memorial mass in Manhattan, 3,000 people stood in the street, even though a loudspeaker system is no longer working, just to pay their respects, while another 1,000 people were inside the church. And today, here on the Upper East Side of the Manhattan, near the St. Thomas More Church, even though it was closed to the public, and the public wasn't even allowed close enough to the church to see it, people stood on these street corners, hundreds on the various corners surrounding this area, to pay their respects. We asked people why they came out, and they said it was just the only thing we could do to show our respect to the Kennedy family. This airplane crash off the coast of Martha's Vineyard happened a week ago today, and most of the people out here still can't believe it happened. This is Gary Tuckman, CNN Live in New York City.
And at the same hour as the Mass at St. Thomas More Church, there was another memorial service in New York. About 150 people attended a gathering at a small African-American church in Harlem. The pastor says he wanted to honor the Kennedy family for its involvement in the civil rights struggle.
We love them dearly. They're a part of us. We could never forget them. We could never forget John Kennedy Sr., the president. We could never forget Bobby Kennedy walking down in Alabama with George Wallace, with the dogs and the water hoses, with Dr. King. We can't forget how when Dr. King was assassinated, he sent a plane to get the body, to bring it back to Atlanta for us. We can't forget. We can't forget how he left and went to Memphis with Coretta Scott King and marched after he was assassinated. We just can't forget this family.
The pastor says a register book signed by mourners will be turned over to the Kennedy family.
One more memorial service is scheduled. Lauren Bissett will be remembered during a private memorial service tomorrow night at her hometown in Greenwich, Connecticut.
The National Transportation Safety Board says its investigation into the crash could take 6 to 9 months. Here's CNN's Carl Rochelle.
When a plane goes down, the National Transportation Safety Board dispatches a GO team, a group of individuals with expertise ranging from weather to engines, and pilot performance to public affairs. There is always a GO team available, anytime, day or night. This time, Chairman Jim Hall got the call, along with lead investigator Robert Pierce of the field office in Parsippany, New Jersey. Pierce will head a half-dozen investigators who will examine every piece of wreckage in minute detail for clues. Among the first tasks, studying radar data. He's already told investigators a great deal about the final minutes of the plane.
The airplane started a turn to the right and climbed back to 2,600 feet. It remained at that altitude for about 1 minute while on a southeasterly heading. 30 seconds into the maneuver, the airplane started a turn to the right and descended at a rapid rate of descent. The rate of descent may have been greater than 5,000 feet per minute.
Investigators will continue to study radar tapes for more clues. The wreckage picked up from the floor of the Atlantic Ocean off Martha's Vineyard is being brought to Newport, Rhode Island Friday by the Navy salvage ship Grasp. It will be unloaded there for transport to this hangar at the Coast Guard Air Station on Cape Cod. There, it will be laid out to resemble the plane it once was and studied for more clues about the crash. A crash at sea with the wreckage on the bottom of the ocean produces unique problems. The absence of a cockpit voice recorder and a flight data recorder make it an even more difficult task. Autopsies were performed on the bodies of John Kennedy, his wife and sister-in-law, a part of the process of gathering information performed on pilots and passengers in crashes. The weather at the time, visibility, clouds, and wind will be studied by the meteorological experts. The Human Factors Division is already in the process of securing records of John Kennedy's pilot training, his medical records, for every pilot must have a flight physical. Instructors who flew with Kennedy will be interviewed, as well as the FAA-designated examiner who gave him the check ride for its private pilot's license, and the instructor who endorsed his logbook, approving him for flying a high-performance plane like the Piper Saratoga. All of this and more, done at a meticulous, time-consuming pace, easily accounts for the 6 to 9 month time lapse between the time of the accident and the publishing of a final report.
Carl Rochelle, CNN, Hyannisport, Massachusetts.
Other news to report today, including the third time apparently is the charm for the shuttle Columbia. They launched that ship, most expensive shuttle mission ever. We'll be back for that story as CNN Today continues.
This is indeed a small miracle, a triumph over everyday arthritis pain, made possible by a remarkable medicine. Tylenol Arthritis Extended Relief. So effective even the newest arthritis prescription hasn't been proven to work better. And stomach safety no other brand of pain reliever can surpass. Miracle drug? Someone sure thinks so. Tylenol Arthritis. Take comfort in our strength.
Television sets equipped with the new V-chip are now available. This system allows you to program your television to control the programs your children watch. Use the TV parental guidelines to choose programming best suited for your family. The V-chip and TV parental guidelines Together, your guide to better family viewing. For a free booklet, call toll-free 1-877-2VCHIP-TV or visit our website at tvguidelines.org.
148 million people on the internet. 67,000 more jump in every day. With so many people doing so much business, no wonder it's sometimes so unpredictable. And that's where we come in. We make the things that make the internet faster, more reliable. Everything you always imagined it could be. Lucent Technologies. We make the things that make communications work.
Now, CNN.com/health with WebMD offers the most comprehensive healthcare information online. From breaking news and cutting-edge treatments to alternative remedies, find the answers to your questions on CNN.com in association with WebMD.
After 2 false starts, Space Shuttle Columbia finally is in orbit, and its primary mission already has been accomplished. But there were some difficult moments along the way, as we hear from CNN's Miles O'Brien, who's at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida today.
8, 7, 6.
This time, Columbia provided the thunder and lightning. She blazed into orbit at midnight.
We have booster ignition and lift
With Eileen Collins at the helm. But the first woman to command a space shuttle had her hands full right from the start.
Houston, Columbia is in the roll. We've got a fuel cell pH number 1.
5 seconds after liftoff, a mysterious short circuit caused a power outage to computers controlling critical functions in 2 of the shuttle's 3 main engines. Each engine is equipped with a backup controller, which in this case kept the engines firing as intended. It was a tense moment, although controllers downplayed it later.
Well, I don't like to speak for someone else, but if I were Eileen Collins, I imagine this mission seemed like a fairly mild simulation that she's been training for the last 2 years.
A crowd of VIPs and family members watched and cheered. Eileen Collins' husband, Pat Youngs, was there with their 3.5-year-old daughter, Bridget.
Did you hear the little hiccup with the sensor as it went up? Did that scare you at all?
It didn't scare me, but just trying to pay attention to see how serious it might be. And a couple astronauts up there with us, familiar with all the technical terms, and you know, they're right there saying no big deal.
In fact, Columbia's main engines ran well, but they shut down about a second early, leaving the orbiter 7 miles lower than planned. Launch controllers say Columbia had run out of liquid oxygen, which combined with liquid hydrogen fuels the main engines. Controllers aren't sure why they fell short, but as it turns out, the high point of the orbit was good enough for deployment of the Chandra X-ray telescope. The $1.5 billion observatory was tilted, checked out, unplugged, and then released over the Pacific, 7 hours and 17 minutes after launch.
And I know that a lot of people have seen Chandra as it's been constructed and seen it as it's been installed in the shuttle, but I will tell you there is nothing as beautiful as Chandra sailing off on its way to work.
Columbia then maneuvered out of harm's way as a booster rocket sent Chandra into an elliptical orbit that will take it as far as 87,000 miles away from Earth for an unobstructed view of black holes, supernova, and colliding galaxies. Scientists hope Chandra's 5-year mission will give them new insights into the origins of the universe. Meanwhile, NASA engineers will be looking into the origins of that short circuit. So far, they say they see nothing that will shorten this historic 5-day mission. Miles O'Brien, CNN at the Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
The CNN Today notebook starts with another police investigation at Yosemite National Park. A 26-year-old woman who worked at the park has been found dead, and the case is being investigated as a homicide. Her name hasn't been released. The body was found a few miles from El Portal, California. That's the last place 3 tourists were seen in February before they were found dead. No charges have been filed in that case. A Japanese airliner landed safely today after a hijack attempt in which the pilot was killed. The All Nippon Airways 747 had just started a flight from Tokyo to northern Japan when a man forced his way into the cockpit. Authorities say the man fatally stabbed the pilot and tried to fly the plane himself, but he was overpowered by the co-pilot and an off-duty pilot. The plane landed safely. After his arrest, the suspect reportedly told police he just wanted to fly a plane.
The Tour de France, which finishes up this weekend, obviously is a marathon of endurance for the cyclists, but one of the athletes has endured more than cycling pain to become a race leader. CNN's Paris Bureau Chief Peter Hume with our report.
Less than 3 years ago, Lance Armstrong was fighting to stay alive. Now he's battling to stay in front of the pack in the Tour de France cycling marathon. The 27-year-old native of Texas underwent surgery for cancer of the testicles, lung, and abdomen in the autumn of 1996. When brain tumors were also diagnosed, he was told his chances of survival were slim.
But with just a few days to go before the Tour's grand finale in Paris, Armstrong looks likely to become only the second American in history to win the world's most prestigious cycling race.
Armstrong led the field after the first stage of the 2,300-mile or 3,700-kilometer-long event. Despite slipping out of first place for a few days, he now has a convincing lead over the 140 or so other riders.
A champion is someone who by definition has more qualities than most others. Because of his unique character, Lance Armstrong was able to overcome his disease.
The cancer that nearly killed Armstrong damaged many of his muscles. Yet just a few months after his final surgery, he was back in the saddle in what was a lengthy and painful period of rehabilitation. On the track in Paris's Bois de Boulogne, hundreds of amateur cyclists, young and old, practice one of France's most popular sports. To many, Armstrong is not just a great rider, but an inspiration too. Well, I broke my leg skiing, says 72-year-old Monsieur Menu. Armstrong has come back from something far more serious, he adds. It's fantastic. He's a champion because he survived cancer, this enthusiast says. He survived cancer because he's a great champion. The Tour de France has been struggling to re-establish its reputation after last year's revelations of the widespread use of illegal drugs. Lance Armstrong's remarkable performance, say the experts, has already gone a long way to helping restore that reputation. Peter Hume, CNN, Paris.
And when we come back, more in memory of John F. Kennedy Jr. We'll take a look back at John's life from his early years, guarded by Jackie, to adulthood.
Today on CNN Talkback Live, a celebration of JFK Jr., remembering his life with those who knew him. Today, 3 Eastern on CNN.
Are you paying too much for term life insurance? Now, through Matrix Direct, a 35-year-old man could get $100,000 term life coverage for less than $10 a month. Guaranteed for 10 years from a top insurer, Transamerica. A 45-year-old man could get $100,000 term life coverage for less than $15 a month. Call for a fast free quote over the phone. Matrix Direct, 1-800-725-5728.
Has the zip in your car finally run out of gas? Tired of fixing and fighting it? Volunteers of America will take it off your hands and offer you free towing. We'll even take that old truck, boat, or motorcycle, whether it's running or not, and you could get a tax deduction for your donation. Call Volunteers of America at 1-800-427-6327 and help yourself while helping over 16,000 children, families, and adults in Greater New Orleans. Call Volunteers of America at 1-800-427-6327 to donate your vehicle and get a possible tax deduction.
The Moneyline News Hour, weeknight 6:30 Eastern. You are what you know.
The hour's top story is a private celebration of the brief shining lives of John and Carolyn Kennedy. If you've been watching CNN, you know an invitation-only congregation of some 350 relatives and friends attended what the family called a celebratory mass at St. Thomas More Catholic Church in New York. The media were specifically not invited, nor was the sound from the 90-minute service piped outside. Among the invited guests, the current First Family, whose ties to the Kennedys go far beyond Democratic politics. President Clinton has long said his face-to-face meeting with President Kennedy in 1963 inspired him, Mr. Clinton, to enter public service. In March of last year, the Clintons gave the Kennedys a private tour of the White House living quarters, and CNN has told Mr. Clinton brought along with him to New York 3 photo albums commemorating that visit. One of those albums, we're told, was given to Senator Ted Kennedy, another to Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg, the third to the family of Carolyn and Lauren Bassett.
A memorial service for Lauren is scheduled for tomorrow. The 34-year-old investment banker will be remembered in an Episcopal ceremony at Christ Church in the family's hometown of Greenwich, Connecticut. That service begins at 7 p.m. Eastern, and it, too, is private.
Privacy, as you know, was a precious commodity during the Kennedy children's upbringing, yet their lives became part of our lives. Their memories were our memories.
They were. CNN's Candy Crowley compiled this remembrance of John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., a president's son, but very much his own man.
He was the world's most famous 3-year-old, a child of extraordinary circumstance, for whom his mother wanted an ordinary life.
She took those two children to New York. She tried to build them as private a life as they could and as different a life. I think she felt they didn't have to gravitate into politics.
In the early days, it was rare to see one without the other. Daughter and mother, son and mother, mother and daughter and son. It's been the three of us for so long, 26-year-old John once said. Mommy, me, and Caroline.
His mother was very protective of him and didn't allow him or let him much out of her sight in his early years. And, of course, he had the nannies to take care of him.
It is easy to look back now and see when lifelong passions begin to burn, for the sea and for the air. And were that not astronaut John Glenn at his side, and were that not his ever-recognizable mother teaching him to ski, the archives of John Kennedy's life would look much like so many other American scrapbooks.
Queen Elizabeth escorts Mrs. John F. Kennedy and her children.
But an ordinary life is a sometime thing when the initials are JFK. There were memorials to his father to dedicate and ships to be christened. It's said that Uncle Bobby, that's him there beneath all the children, John at the lower right, was the one who began the task of teaching a fatherless child about being a man.
Now it's on to Chicago and let's win there.
Robert Kennedy died when John was 7. If they're killing Kennedys, Jackie is reported to have said, then my children are targets. 4 months later, she married Aristotle Onassis, a Greek shipping tycoon 29 years her senior. America did not like the Lady of Camelot running off to another country, and it was easy to read disapproval into the bowed head of John as he acquired a stepfather he always called Mr. Onassis. There were exotic summers from Greece to Monte Carlo, but it was back to New York in the fall for the school year.
John was a typical kid. I remember very clearly he would on occasion forget his work.
One of John's teachers at Collegiate Elementary School remembers the night his phone rang.
On our kitchen phone from the ship-to-shore operator, and it was John's mother telling me that she had read him the riot act and he would certainly have his homework for me the next day.
The pictures hint of a free spirit in the making, a kid who liked to shake the Secret Service when he could. His code name was Lark, a kid who loved karate so much he hated the interruption of vacation.
And his mother would send me notes saying that, you know, he was very upset to have to miss, but could I please tell him it was okay so he would go on vacation and not be grumpy.
There were trips to the Kennedy family compound as well, but not for long summer months. Jackie wanted some separation from her son and the family that shared his name.
As he grew older, she kept him a little sheltered and away from the rest of the Kennedy children.
In his late teens, John's summers were carefully scheduled by his mother, including a stint in Guatemala, providing earthquake relief.
He was usually not around the other kids until, like, Labor Day or the end of the summer.
As John Jr. approached adolescence, Jackie asked old friends to give the children memories of a father they barely knew.
So this was something that got them into a brain very, very strongly, and particularly with John Jr. He started to thinking about, well, this is something that my father did, and maybe I've got to do something with the kind of thing that my father did.
The year Caroline graduated from high school, Aristotle Onassis died. The family returned to New York, and within a year, John was at the prestigious Phillips Academy in Andover.
I remember he joined our stickball league and was on our stickball team, which is sort of just a fun athletic event after dinner every night here on the Great Lawn. And he made up T-shirts that said, God, family, school, stickball across the back.
He had to repeat junior year after flunking math. His passions were theater and athletics.
He was a good, solid, average, liberal-hearted, free-thinking, smiling young man who did too much weightlifting and too much acting in high school to really get great grades. And I used to abuse him for that in a kind of witty way.
John chose Brown for college, a telling decision for a family with deep Harvard roots. And Jackie, it seems, had raised the son she wanted.
The remarkable fact about him was that he was so unremarkable in that way. I mean, he was very easygoing and very comfortable to be around. So you didn't get this sense, oh, you know, I'm around John Kennedy Jr., the son of one of the best presidents, if not the best president, that this country has ever had.
At Brown, he dabbled in Shakespeare, still drawn to the stage.
My call is to the young and hot.
But the siren call of his legacy was never far from the world he inhabited. In October of '79, they dedicated the JFK Library.
Born of the sun, they traveled a short while towards the sun, and left the vivid air sun with their honor.
And in the summer of his 20th year, John F. Kennedy Jr. returned to Washington, D.C. to work as an intern for a liberal think tank.
He was torn at that time between a career in public life and a career in theater or maybe the arts.
It's said that Jackie put the kibosh on a life in the theater. Still, as late as 1988, John took a part in a film produced by a friend.
What does it matter what we do when we're not together? When we're together, you know, we're really together.
Graduation from Brown in '83 was followed by 3 years of global roaming. In '86, JFK enrolled in New York University Law School. A law degree is a staple of political life. That same year, Caroline was married. The inseparable trio, Mommy, me, and Caroline, were on different tracks. Caroline moving deeper into a private world. John further into the public domain.
Thank you very much.
The stage he played on was the 1988 Democratic Convention, his national political debut.
So many of you came into public service because of him. In a very real sense, because of you, he is with us still.
Old friends of his dad began to dream again.
I said, you know, what you did was so good. You've got to now think about the possibility of going into politics. He said, you know, I've got an idea. I think I'll do some politics in the next century. I'm thinking of running for the Senate in 2004 or 2006.
His ease in front of the camera, his casual acceptance of the Klieg lights had winner written all over it. But Jackie had raised a rebel, her poetry in his soul, his father's politics in his blood. With a law degree in hand and a set of magic initials, John F. Kennedy Jr. was launched into the world, the 3-year-old of extraordinary circumstance, had become a young adult with extraordinary opportunities. Candy Crowley, CNN, Washington.
Now, people cruising the internet looking for health information and support can go to the same place doctors go, WebMD. WebMD opens up access to trusted health information to everyone. It uses the power of the internet to bring people and doctors closer together and will help us all make the leap into the future of healthcare. Health finally has a homepage, WebMD.
Before you choose a vacation, ask yourself some questions. Ireland. 7-day motor coach tour including airfare and accommodation, $798. Contact your travel agent, or for a free vacation kit, call 1-800-SHAMROCK. Ireland. Awaken to a different world.
When it comes to your health, CNN provides the breaking news and information you need. CNN's medical experts report on cutting-edge advances in treatment and prevention from around the world. On weekends, Dr. Steve Salvatore looks at global health issues from nutrition and exercise to parenting and adding years to your life. Plus, log on to the most complete medical site on the web, CNN.com and WebMD. Make your health a priority 7 days a week, only on CNN.
Sunday on CNN and Time, her dramatic emails captured the horror of war.
At the moment I am writing to you, just from my balcony, I can see people running with suitcases, and I can hear some gunshots. I wish I could live in peace like you do. Take care. Adona, Kosovo.
Now, in her first interview, the girl known as Adona shares her story of survival. CNN and Time, Sunday 8, 7 Central on CNN.
Next week, the tax cut wars move to the Senate, having ended at least temporarily in the House. There, Republican leaders managed to push through a $792 billion package of tax relief that President Clinton has already promised to veto. Among its provisions is the gradual return of an American institution. CNN's Brooks Jackson reports its very name has budget cutters shaken, not stirred.
The most famous tax deduction of all, the fabled, some would say libeled, 2-martini business lunch. Democrat George McGovern attacked it. Jimmy Carter called it by another name.
The $50 martini lunch.
A Republican, Ronald Reagan, signed the 1986 tax law limiting deductions for the 2-martini lunch. His words. And then in '93,
the loopholes for 3 martini lunches.
President Clinton's tax bill slashed deductions further to 50 cents on the dollar. Now, House Republicans want to ease deductions for business meals back up to 80% over the next 10 years.
If we're going to have legitimate business deductions, then a person buying a meal for the purposes of discussing business, discussing making a sale of his product, ought to be deductible.
The way the tax laws work now is that if you really did have 2 martinis at lunch, you could only deduct one of them. But if this provision becomes law, eventually you'd be able to deduct 1.6 martinis.
Democrats say they'll fight.
Well, under this provision, you can get 2 martinis, a $100 bottle of Cabernet, the finest steak, all subsidized by hard-working families across this country.
That's the rhetoric, but the owner of this Virginia restaurant says the average lunch tab is less than $12 a person, and real business is being done.
I wish I could take just 2 basis points of every deal that's struck at one of these tables. If I could, their lunch would be free. They wouldn't have to worry about deducting 50% of it.
The only martinis we saw were the ones we ordered as visual aids.
Coke, iced tea, Diet Coke, and Coke.
So maybe we should call it the 2 iced tea lunch. Some loophole. Brooks Jackson, CNN, McLean, Virginia.
You've seen those How's My Driving stickers on trucks, vans, and taxis? In Parker, Colorado, there's a white Honda Civic with a How's My Driving bumper sticker. The car belongs to 16-year-old Sam Minnick. The phone number belongs to Sam's mom. She decided to start soliciting comments on Sam's driving after he racked up 2 speeding tickets and 1 accident. After 2 months, Sam's mom says his driving has improved. Sam's opinion of the sign on his car has not.
Don't you know Sam hates driving around with that?
I don't think Mom cares much about that.
Way to go, Mom.
Good idea.
Coming next, Apple polishing takes on a whole new meaning.
A Beanie Baby for the teacher gets extra credit, and an unpaid suspension for the teacher. That story's next.
Allergies are annoying. Allegra does this to seasonal allergy symptoms. Allegra has fexofenadine. You can't get fexofenadine anywhere but in Allegra. It really works. Allegra is for people 12 and over. Ask your doctor or pharmacist for more information. In clinical studies, less than 3% of people experience drowsiness, cold or flu, nausea, or menstrual pain. Allegra. Enjoy the world around you.
Congratulations. Look what just arrived. Peanut butter chocolate and cocoa Rice Krispies treats. 2 new additions to the Rice Krispies treats family.
That's funny. They don't look anything like you.
Now you can make every night a nickel a minute.
Introducing Sprint Nickel Nights. Now every night till midnight, every call is just a nickel a minute. It's giving America night fever and savings that make every night the right time to talk. Catch night fever for yourself. Call now and get Sprint Nickel Nights. Call 1-877-4-NIGHT. Switch to Sprint now, and every night you can call all you want at the time that's best for you without having to dial all those extra 1010 numbers. Call 1-877-4-NIGHT and get Sprint Nickel Nights for night after night of long distance your way. Just 5 cents a minute every night of the week. Catch night fever and make every night your time to call. Switch to Sprint Nickel Nights. Call 1-877-4-NIGHT now or visit the Sprint store at Radio Shack and catch night fever right now.
From the pages of our CNN Today notebook, Kathleen Solia's return to Minnesota is at the top. The suspected former terrorist is expected to return home to St. Paul today after her release this week from a Los Angeles jail. Police say Solia, a former member of the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA, planted pipe bombs under police cars back in 1975, then ran from the law and hid out for more than 2 decades. She was arrested last month in Minnesota, where she was known as Sarah Jane Olson. The flying of the Confederate flag over the South Carolina State House is at the center of a growing controversy. For the second time this week, a national group has canceled plans to hold a convention in South Carolina. The latest group to cancel, the National Urban League, Tuesday, just 4 days before it was to convene, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference called off its meeting in Charleston in protest of that flag.
In Georgia, some Beanie Babies are at the center of a fight between a school board and a former Teacher of the Year. Carol Penland is fighting a 60-day suspension handed down by the Cobb County School Board near Atlanta. Penland, it seems, offered students extra credit in exchange for teeny Beanie Babies. Penland's lawyer says his client planned to give the toys to foster children. She's fighting the suspension in court.
We'll let you know how that turns out. Now, Rhonda Rowland, is it? Where are we going?
Rhonda Schaffler.
Rhonda Schaffler, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Okay. Stocks here are lower. Hi. We've seen stocks down throughout much of the week. They're lower again this afternoon and unable to rebound from yesterday's sell-off, sparked by testimony from Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan. That is still very much weighing on the market today. Greenspan said the Fed would raise interest rates if needed. The Dow Jones Industrial Average at the moment is sliding 60 points at 10,908. Shares of J.P. Morgan losing more than $3. The Nasdaq Composite is also lower as tech stocks continue to weaken, down 13 points on that index. In the bond market, the 30-year Treasury issue is losing about 22/32 in price. The yield is at 6.01%. There's a merger in the grocery business. Safeway is buying Randall's Food Markets for $1.8 billion in cash, stock, and debt. Randall's is a Texas-based supermarket chain. The combined company will operate more than 1,600 stores in the U.S. and Canada and will employ more than 180,000. This is the latest in a series of mergers in the grocery business. Just last year, Safeway merged with Chicago-based Dominick. That's a quick look at business news. CNN Today will be right back.
Stock Market Update is brought to you by Schwab. Ready to move up?
Yeah, hi. I'm thinking about buying a large block of Major Building Corporation, and what I'd like to know is what's the size of the market right now? Take your time. Yep.
When you have an investment question, does your online brokerage have anybody there to answer it? We do.
At American Century, we've got some pretty impressive mutual funds to choose from, like our Ultra Fund or our Select Fund. What about Income and Growth and our Ginnie Mae Fund? Hey, don't forget our Short-Term Government Fund and our Equity Growth Fund. Then there's our Limited-Term Tax-Free Fund. And of course, there's our International Growth Fund. That's a lot of great-looking funds, not to mention a lot of great-looking guys.
Call us or your investment professional.
Hey guys, what you up to?
Mom's got a bad headache, so we're taking her some ice cream.
Well, maybe I can help too. I'll be right there.
For headaches, doctors recommend Tylenol more than any other brand. It's the most trusted combination of strength and safety in pain relief today.
Don't forget the softball.
I knew the ice cream would help.
Tylenol. Take comfort in our strength.
I have a dream.
My first priority. Because of the impact of the printing press in the mid-15th century, we finally have an education and a culture that is not only for the elite. There certainly were books prior to the printing press, but books were done beautifully but very slowly because they were hand-copied. And so prior to the middle of the 15th century, even the most wealthy people might own 2, 3, 4, 5 books in their lifetime. With the printing press, you could have a run of 500 books. You could have the Bible translated into the language of the people and printed and distributed. You could have works of great creativity that became available to a wide range of people. You also had a real spread of literacy, of people who were then able to read, and people who read aloud, so that books were also being read to people and spreading ideas even further. Printing press is probably one of those major events that really changed the way people live their lives.
This Voices of the Millennium is presented by Lincoln, American Luxury.
Leather, adrenaline, the new Lincoln LS.
Well, it seems sunglasses aren't just for people anymore, Lou. In Britain, a guard dog has started wearing some prescription sunglasses. Well, hopefully he'll come back so you can see. Ben is a 3-year-old German Shepherd with an incurable eye condition.
Cool.
The problem is aggravated by the sun's ultraviolet rays, so Ben's vet decided sunglasses were in order. Ben's owners say he wears the new specs for hours and seems much happier than before.
Way cool.
And you know, Calvin Klein, he looks good in them.
Police dogs should have those mirrored kind, though, don't you think? A lot of folks...
Yes, Lou.
Yeah. A lot of folks will be needing sunglasses in the Midwest, apparently. Here's Valerie Boss with the weather.
Well, Lou, it's sure hot enough. I think wire rim mirrors would be the way to go for that German Shepherd. We're looking at our weather watch, and boy, it is hot. Hazy and hot would probably be a good way to describe it. There are excessive heat warnings in effect in the Chicago area, and heat advisories stretching all the way from parts of South Dakota and Nebraska through most of Iowa, parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Missouri, all of Illinois, much of Kentucky, all of Indiana, and into Ohio. It could feel like 105 to 115 degrees across this region, and it's not the only region we're looking at. All along the East Coast, from Philadelphia down to Jacksonville, heat advisories and excessive heat warnings have been issued. You want to really slow down, take it easy, drink plenty of water, because this heat is very debilitating. Tomorrow's highs, not much change, 90s from the mid-Atlantic to the upper Midwest down into Texas, triple digits in the Southwest. It will be a little cooler across the northwestern part of the country. We're looking for mostly 70s and 80s across the Northeast and New England. Severe storms are possible today from sections of Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, through Michigan and into parts of Ontario, northern Ohio. The stormiest weather right now is across Michigan. It's out ahead of a cold front that is moving through this region and will continue to do so through tomorrow morning into tomorrow evening. The southeast, with the heat and humidity and a wave of low pressure, could see some scattered showers and storms, especially during the afternoon and evening hours, and with time they'll work their way up the coast in advance of this cold front. A few rain showers or thunderstorms, high base perhaps across the cold front in the west, and the monsoon season is still around across sections of the southwest. Take a look at our radar right now. You see the stormy weather pushing into Michigan. Central Michigan, a possible tornado has been reported around Rosebush, and there is a severe thunderstorm watch in effect, a couple of them across sections of the lower half of Michigan because of this stormy weather we've been looking at. Now, let's go on and take a look, oh boy, at our extended outlooks. The colors are bad, but you get the idea. 80s, 90s, triple digits on Monday. We look at stormy weather. The pink areas are the stormy areas through the Great Lakes in New England and into the northeastern part of the country. There, it's looking better. And as we move along into Tuesday, you see some showers across the northeast, showers and storms scattered through the plains to the southeast. And that should be about it. Hope you like those colors. Lou, Natalie, need some sunglasses for those, right?
I thought it was quite nice, Valerie.
You need more pink storms.
Yeah.
Next, JFK Jr. Amid the tears, the laughter.
It's difficult to stand before you fully clothed and compete for your attention with 7 people in their underwear. We'll do our best.
Jeannie Most on the Kennedy's sense of humor when we come back.
Today on CNN Talkback Live, a celebration of JFK Jr., remembering his life with those who knew him. Today, 3 Eastern on CNN.
Time to move on.
Get moving.
It's about experience. It's about contribution. It's about satisfaction. Air Force Reserve. What a way to spend your time.
1-800-257-1212.
A Bare Naked Summer's Night, live from Boston. Bare Naked Ladies perform their hits from the triple platinum album Stunt, plus all the Bare Naked Ladies classics, including One Week, It's All Been Done, Jane, If I Had $1 Million, Brian Wilson, and Old Apartment in their one-of-a-kind onstage style, live from Boston. Friday, July 30th, both 9 and 11 p.m. Eastern on pay-per-view.
Canada's Red Hot Band, one scorching summer show on Cox Pay-Per-View.
InsideNewOrleans.com, New Orleans' best local website. InsideNewOrleans.com gives you the best way to search for local websites. Search by your favorite category. It's easy. InsideNewOrleans.com is where you can find the best local websites for New Orleans and the entire West. It's about connecting you to the world, but always bringing you home. So, where do you start online? Start inside. InsideNewOrleans.com.
I, Brandon, promise to do my best, help other people, friendly and kind. I have to smile, promise to do my best, to do my duty, helping out, help the elderly, truthful, plant a tree, that kind of stuff. Promise to guide my country, to help other people, doing good deeds for other people, taking care of your environment. It's fun to obey the laws.
Scouting, because it's so much to live up to.
It's a cool thing to do.
Remembering John F. Kennedy Jr. on Larry King Live tonight.
Before the news of last week's plane crash turned our thoughts of JFK Jr. into sad thoughts, many of our previous memories were proud ones, poignant ones, even funny ones.
Yeah. CNN's Jeannie Most reminds us not to forget JFK Jr.'s notorious sense of humor.
The kid who once entertained the grown-ups by wearing a basket on his head never let his fame go to his head, handling all the attention with a pinch of humor, whether it be by reaching to pinch his wife, or by starting a speech with a quip.
It's difficult to stand before you fully clothed and compete for your attention with 7 people in their underwear. We'll do our best.
But even scantily clad models on a jockey underwear billboard were no competition for the hunk. No son of a president can be accused of taking himself too seriously when he poses semi-nude in his own magazine. Even when JFK Jr. failed the bar exam twice, his sense of humor never failed him.
Clearly not a measure of legal genius.
Who needs genius when you've got those Kennedy genes? During a rare late-night talk show appearance, JFK and Jerry Seinfeld chatted about a Seinfeld episode in which an actor played John. The next day, when the real JFK Jr. arrived in court as an assistant district attorney,
the defendant is sitting there over there, and he goes, "You were on Seinfeld." And I was like, no, I wasn't on Seinfeld. And he leans over to his lawyer and he goes, "Guy's an actor, too. No wonder he failed a bar exam."
John always seemed bemused by the ruckus he caused, even warning a relentless photographer following him on a bike not to fall.
Don't fall.
What?
Don't fall.
I won't. JFK was dogged by photographers even while playing with dogs as a kid. As an adult, John once dyed his dog orange. This dog, a service that specializes in food coloring pets, says John brought his dog here to have him dyed orange for a Halloween party. Ever playful?
I'm jealous to my wife.
JFK's humor was wry, dry, and droll.
There is one other wedding dress in the world exactly like my wife Carolyn's, and I believe it's owned by Dennis Rodman.
Actually, Dennis's dress had a much more modest neckline. JFK was both modest and self-deprecating. Could he see himself in elective office?
Yeah, I mean, I can see myself lying on a beach in a hammock. So I could see myself in elective office, too.
And what would JFK say about the hoopla over his demise?
Slow news day, I guess, huh?
Jeannie Moe, CNN, New York.
And we'll be right back.
This is CNN.
A memorial mass today for John Kennedy Jr. and his wife, Carolyn.
Those who never knew the couple keep vigil at the Kennedys' Manhattan home.
A tragic week for two families. We take a look back at the end of this hour. It's 2 p.m. now on the East Coast, 11 a.m. out west. It's Friday, July 23rd.
From CNN Center in Atlanta, hello again, everyone. This is CNN Today. I'm Natalie Allen.
And I'm Lou Waters. Friends and loved ones gathered at a Manhattan church today. There, they celebrated the lives of John Kennedy Jr. and his wife, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. As he has done so many times, Senator Ted Kennedy led his famous family in mourning today before 350 invited guests. The President and Mrs. Clinton attended, as did members of Congress and a few notables from the Kennedy administration. Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg, who organized this very private goodbye to her brother, was accompanied by her husband, Edwin, and their 3 children.
Today's memorial mass was held at St. Thomas More Catholic Church on the Upper East Side, the same church Kennedy attended as a child with his mother. CNN's Gary Tuckman is there. Gary?
Well, Natalie, they came to mourn, they came to pray, but most of all, they came to celebrate the lives of Mr. and Mrs. John F. Kennedy Jr. The setting was the church behind me, the St. Thomas More Church on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It was the setting for a memorial mass for JFK Jr. and his wife, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. Many of our eyes were on Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg because she's had so many hardships in her life because of the premature deaths of both her parents, and now she has buried her only sibling. Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg stressed the importance of making this a completely private service. Only family and friends were in the church. There was no television coverage, no reporters, nothing of that kind. It was a very quiet service, 350 people in this small church. Her Uncle Ted did deliver the eulogy. Edward Kennedy's eulogy was described by one participant as very moving. He has been a father figure to John Jr. and Caroline since their father was assassinated in 1963. Senator was one of the family members who participated in yesterday's burial at sea in Massachusetts. Among the 350 guests, the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, his wife Hillary, and daughter Chelsea. The President has been deeply affected by this tragedy as a close friend of the Kennedy family. Now, security was elaborate, and members of the public were not allowed in sight of the church. Nevertheless, hundreds of people stood on street corners in the area. The church is on East 89th Street in New York City. East 88th Street, 87th Street, 90th Street, the streets surrounding the area were crowded with people who wanted to show their respect in any way they could. Most of them did not know the Kennedys. Many of them had never even seen a Kennedy in person, but they did want to be part of this. After about 90 minutes, the mass ended. Members of the Kennedy, Bessette, and Freeman families hugged and cried. Freeman is the last name of Carolyn and Lauren's mother and stepfather. 1 week, exactly 1 week after this plane crashed, the families had said their final goodbyes. There will be one more memorial service tomorrow night in Greenwich, Connecticut. A separate memorial service will be held for Lauren Bissett. Natalie, back to you.
Gary Tuckman. Thanks, Gary. Now to Lou.
Mourners have gathered again today outside John and Carolyn Kennedy's Manhattan apartment home, and CNN's Deborah Fayrick is keeping watch there. Deborah?
Well, Lou, a steady stream of people arriving here today. Let's take a look at a few cars also. They have not closed off the road. Police have not closed off the road. Oh, you can see how many people, thousands, have come over the last few days. Police tells us that the family has hired a private security firm as a precautionary measure just to secure John Kennedy's apartment. Of course, you can see the number of people here, that a possible reason. Among the new mementos, seashells and a postcard from Cape Cod. As you know, that's the area near where the plane went down. And this crowd really transcends nationality and age. We've seen wheelchairs and walkers, even strollers. Many people coming here to grieve.
I think it's a serious tragedy. It's a shame. It's a real shame. I feel a very deep sense of loss for him, his family, and I just wanted to come and express my condolences in a way that I could.
I just got off the night flight from Arizona just to come here and see all this because I felt that I had to. He's been such an intricate part of all of our lives, and it's just a shame.
And I find him such a respectable person, a lovely person. It's a big loss to America, I would say that.
One note describes the impact that the Kennedys had on 3 generations. Another note expresses a sense of what could have been. A woman writes, "My mother wept for the president she had. Now together we weep for the president we will never have." And another political note says, "You were the only Democrat I would have voted for." The prevailing question among many of the people that we're speaking to here is why? Why did John Kennedy Jr. have to fly that plane that day? One sign perhaps explains it in part, if you can imagine for a moment. It's a conversation in heaven. John Kennedy and his mother. His mother says, "You're not supposed to be here." And John Kennedy in this sign answers, "I made a mistake. I'm sorry." Reporting live from Tribeca. Back to you, Lou.
All right, Deborah. And while the John and Carolyn Kennedy Mass was being celebrated at St. Thomas More Catholic Church in Manhattan, some New Yorkers who never knew John F. Kennedy Jr., his wife Carolyn, or her sister Lauren, were having their own memorial in Harlem. A community service was held at a Harlem funeral home several days ago. The owner of the funeral home set up a wreath and a register for Kennedy, his wife and sister-in-law. Dozens of folks have stopped by to pay their respects since. A local minister led today's community service.
While today's focus has been on the memorial mass in New York, the people of Massachusetts continue to pay their respects to John Kennedy, his wife, and her sister. CNN's Jeff Block joins us from the John F. Kennedy Library in Boston. Jeff.
Indeed, Natalie, the favorite son here in Boston, perhaps the favorite son in Boston. This is the John F. Kennedy Library. I was here 20 years ago when this was dedicated. 20 years ago, October, the Kennedy Library was dedicated. John Kennedy Jr. was here for that, and I think it's fair to say that no one thought that 20 years later it would in fact be a memorial to him. As perhaps you see, this is what the people of Boston and people from all over the country have brought. Visitors to the museum bringing bouquets, pictures, presents, flags, cards, all sorts of things, and they've been bringing them all week. They've been piling up here inside the library and the museum. We have pictures of people continuing to sign the condolence books. They started with 1, added another condolence book, and they are now up to 8. They tell us that attendance has been nearly double every day here at the library since Saturday. A lot of people, of course, intending to visit the library anyway, but many more coming and standing in a long line, sometimes several hours, to sign those condolence books, which we are told will be given to Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg when she next visits the museum. The library stayed open an extra 4 hours last night to accommodate those people that wanted to sign the condolence books. They say that they will remain here throughout the weekend. Then they will put them away and, as we said, give them to John F. Kennedy Jr.'s sister. That is the latest from Boston, the John F. Kennedy Memorial Library and Museum. I'm Jeff Block, CNN, reporting live.
And we have just received the tribute to John Kennedy that was read by his uncle, Senator Ted Kennedy, this morning at the Memorial Mass in New York, and we want to bring you a portion of that. These are the words of Senator Edward Kennedy as he spoke at the memorial. He said, "He was a boy who grew into a man with a zest for life and a love of adventure. He was a Pied Piper who brought us all along. He was blessed with a father and mother who never thought anything mattered more than their children." The senator went on to say he had a legacy and he learned to treasure it. He was part of a legend and he learned to live with it. And we'll continue to bring you portions of that eulogy throughout the day here on CNN. As John F. Kennedy Jr. and his wife Carolyn are remembered today, many people are wondering where to send letters of condolence. And here are a couple of addresses for you. The John F. Kennedy Library in Boston. That address, Columbia Point, Boston, Massachusetts, 02125. Letters of condolence also may be sent to Senator Edward Kennedy's Senate office. That address, 315 Russell Senate Office Building, U.S. Senate, Washington, D.C., 20510.
Remembrances of John F. Kennedy Jr. and his wife Carolyn still ahead as CNN Today continues.
Hi, I'm Bob Vila. You know, your home is your sanctuary, the one place you and your children should feel safe. But there can be dangers, too, and some of them are not so obvious. Improperly wired outlets that can electrocute.